The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local community-centered journalism today by signing up to be a monthly sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. It doesn't take much money to support local news.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. BC's provincial election campaign is in full swing. With around 3 weeks to go before voting day, Saturday, October 19th, I got in touch with UBC political science lecturer Stewart Prest to take stock of the campaign so far.
My name is Stewart Prest. I'm a lecturer in political science at the University of British Columbia.
Well, thank you very much for joining me. Speaking from the mainland, what role have you seen Nanaimo play in the provincial election campaign so far?
Well, I think it is in recent years, it has been a pretty safe space for NDP, but I think we are seeing at both the federal and the provincial level a sense that conservatives feel like they have a chance to win in at least a couple of the northern and mid-island ridings. And so I think it is certainly a more competitive than we have seen in the last couple of election cycles.
And on that front, the election boundaries have changed since last time. So as you mentioned before, in kind of the main core Nanaimo riding since 1972, there was only one election cycle where the NDP didn't take it. Now there are maybe two main ridings. There's Nanaimo-Gabriola, there's Nanaimo-Lanceville. This polling aggregator, 338 Canada, suggests that the new one in Nanaimo-Lanceville, I guess they're both new, but the Nanaimo-Lanceville riding where there's no incumbent running, it suggests that is a toss-up. How does that kind of thing influence the campaign that goes on there?
It really ensures, I suppose, to the benefit of Nanaimo, it ensures that it's going to get a lot of attention from the party campaigns, the leaders that we would expect in the few weeks that are remaining in this campaign. That Mr. Eby and Mr. Rustad will both be making a number of passes through the island and stopping by in Nanaimo. Whenever you have a seat that is up for grabs like that, you expect the parties to pay it a generous amount of attention, and so that may also translate into additional attention to Nanaimo-specific issues that perhaps in another election cycle would go under the radar.
Yeah, on the flip side, well, what happens when you have a riding that changes once in 50 years? Like, what are the implications of that for the people living there?
Well, it is a good question, and it's one of the quirks of the first past the post system is that there are some ridings where elections almost become like a spectator sport, where there's a sense that the election is happening somewhere else. I grew up in rural Alberta, and I very much had that experience my entire childhood. That the election, whatever level, whatever was going on, the actual action was happening somewhere else, because it is just such a sure thing that there really isn't much in the way of upside for parties to spend a lot of time and resources making the case to voters in that particular riding, because they're already converted one way or another. And when that party happens to be the party of government, then that can benefit those areas in a number of different ways, because they are part of that governing caucus, and they can be able to be part of the conversation, the MLA representing that district. But during the actual election campaign, and when there is any kind of bidding war between the parties, they're less likely to come out on top.
Okay, and maybe let's move away from that idea of politics as a spectator sport and try and get into some issues. So what have we seen, if we take stock at this point in the campaign? What stands out to you as far as the major proposals or pledges from each of the parties on what or how they would do things differently if they get elected?
I think one of the themes that we are seeing, if you can sort of scope out, the big issues are things like housing, access to affordable housing, but basically regardless of your income, we see people struggling to be comfortably housed, even if they're mid-income, and certainly anyone who is lower income really continues to struggle. And beyond that, broader issues of affordability, the issue of access to healthcare continues to be a significant issue in the campaign as well. And I want if I were to stylize the approach of the two campaigns, I think you could say that the NDP has been big on systematic solutions, long-term solutions to these kinds of problems. And so we see founding of a new medical school at Simon Fraser to try to increase the supply of doctors over the long term. We see commitments to build additional brick and mortar hospitals. We see on the housing front, most particularly a commitment to and now we are seeing a spending of money on additional social housing for students, building, changing the legislation in ways that make it easier to increase density in urban areas, really across the province. And the BC Conservatives, for their part, are effectively saying that actually the housing went bad on NDP's watch, or at least the last 7 years, where the worst 7 years, the housing was always expensive, but it's become more expensive during the NDP's time in office. So we're going to roll back what the NDP has been doing or is starting to do, because it's clearly not working. And instead, they are looking at individual support for individual British Columbians in the form of either rent relief or mortgage relief for residents, and so it's a much more individualist solution. And likewise, when they talk about changing healthcare, they talk about things like a patient-centered approach. So really trying to dedicate resources at the level of the patient, rather than trying to build these large-scale solutions. And so it's a really different philosophy in how to deal with these intractable problems that we see the province facing.
It's kind of a natural way election campaigns work, that there will be stops in different ridings and different announcements on different particular policy planks. If someone is looking to just get an idea of all of the various things a party is promising that they'll do, how much of a larger, maybe like giant platform document can the public expect in this day and age to be able to look through and read through before election day? And when might we see that kind of thing?
We are starting to see pieces of it already, and I don't know that we're going to get anything like the Liberal Red Book is a sort of textbook example, where a party had a massive platform in 1993 at the federal level. It was the first time we ever saw anything like that in Canadian politics. Prior to that, it was sort of a handful of promises, but a lot of, well, we're the ones you can trust sort of thing. And with that Red Book, there's a sense of, here's all the things we're going to do. We're just going to drop it on the desk, and people can go through it at their leisure and see what we're promising. And we've seen other parties move in that direction as well. But more recently, I think parties have become more strategic about communicating their policies to voters. So they will effectively spotlight particular plans for particular issues over the course of the campaign. So this week, for instance, we've seen both parties release platforms about the mining sectors, talking about different ways that they're going to increase economic competitiveness of the province in different ways with regard to that particular sector. So trying to emphasize a desire to build the economy in distinct ways. And so we are going to see versions of that throughout the campaign. Likewise, with the particular promise on housing from the Conservatives earlier in the week, and Mr. Eby looking at development of his own support for renters and owners as well. So I think this is how policy is going to be released over the course of the campaign. I don't know there's going to be one moment where we can say, here's the entire platform all at one go.
So you're a political science professor. You follow things very closely. When you are deciding who to vote for, what kinds of things do you base your decision on?
I look at, I try to understand that the parties will often engage in inflated rhetoric. They will really try to emphasize all the things that they're doing well. Then they will really attack what they see as the weakest points of the opponent. But not everything that every politician says is I'd say equally lining up with the facts of the matter. And so I really would try to go beyond that initial rhetorical flourish and try to look, just as you were asking about a minute ago, to see what the parties actually are promising to do, and then to look at particularly on these hard issues like housing, like healthcare, to see what other observers are saying about the platforms, and try to find a sense of what's a neutral point on which to base your decision making, and not just go by the headlines or the attention grabbing sentences from the leaders themselves. It's part of the conversation, but we also want to see what others are saying about it. And so taking a minute to become acquainted with the stakes of the election is really worth a voter's time.
Do you feel like you have a sense in this election campaign of how many people are out there who are really entrenched in their views, and maybe how many people are out there who haven't made up their minds? And in that case, what do you think their principal concerns are, or how do you think they will make up their minds?
It's a fascinating race in that it seems we use this word polarized in different contexts. So in some ways, we can overdraw differences between different factions in politics, but we have some pretty clear differences between these two parties. They have quite a different philosophy of governance, and we see voters likewise. The majority of them are pretty locked in at this point. So I'd say maybe up to 80% we have a pretty good sense they're going to vote one way or another, and so it's really that last 20% that this campaign is about and for. So this would include some of the former BC United voters who are perhaps still making up their minds if they trust this new version of the BC Conservative Party, or if they would rather stick with the devil, as it were, and line up with the BC NDP, or perhaps even throw up their hands and stay home. And other undecideds who are really not paying as much attention to the political situation and are coming at these issues fresh. And so I think it's going to be a close election. It really has since the disappearance of the BC United option, we do see just about a dead heat between the two parties, and so small changes in the likely voters' preferences can have a large impact. So the campaign is going to continue to matter throughout this election cycle.
And that's something there I want to flag has happened in one of the Nanaimo ridings, Nanaimo, Gabriola Island. Conservative Party candidate Dale Parker did, after BC United make that announcement, did replace the former Conservative candidate, Bharat Damana. Have you seen more broadly that decision maybe influence the campaign in terms of the way the major parties are acting or the things they are saying?
I think so. I think we have seen, for one thing, the BC Conservatives have looked ever more confident. It has given their campaign overall a great, real shot of momentum and an ability to expand the claims to represent the right of the province as a whole. And so it's not that sense of voters choosing which opponent of the NDPs. For those who are frustrated with the government as it currently is, there really is on the right this one option. And so that has been a shot in the arm for the BC Conservatives. For the BC NDP's part, it's pretty clear that they see this as a very tight race, and much tighter than it was even a month ago. And for that reason, we have seen some course corrections from the BC NDP, looking for ways in which they can minimize lines of attack around things like the consumer carbon tax. So that was a reversal, saying if the federal government were to abandon their backstop and it was just a decision for the provincial government, they would no longer have that tax. And that's a real change of position for the NDP, and it suggests that they're perhaps not worried, but they are aware that the margins are small here, and they need to perhaps move a little bit towards the center on some key issues to try to win over those undecided sitting in the center of the political spectrum. Of course, there's a risk in those kinds of strategies as well, because you can alienate some of your more core ardent supporters, and they may be less willing to volunteer to help get out the vote and these sorts of things. So we see the BC NDP making some calculated risks in their attempt to position themselves in this new environment.
And where do the BC Greens maybe fit in to all of this? They have, been campaigning. They've been making promises and pledges such as, for example, free transit across BC if elected. What do you make of their campaign so far and how they kind of fit in?
It's a good question, and the fact that we're really only mentioning them now is part of the answer. In this polarized environment where there is such a strong division between the the two leading parties, it can be hard for a third party to get any oxygen, to get any airtime as part of the discussion, and we see them relatively languishing in the polls as well. So they've had trouble gaining traction in this environment. But that said, I think it in some ways has liberated the Green Party to take some big swings with their policies. And so we see them, for instance, really doubling down on the idea of supporting a carbon tax. Perhaps this is not popular with every British Columbian or even the majority of British Columbians, but they're going to say that this matters. This is a good policy tool. This is, as we all seem to agree just a few years ago, the best policy tool we have to deal with is this pressing challenge of a changing climate. And so they are basically saying, if you believe this is a real issue, we're the only ones who are going to take it seriously. And likewise, they're taking imaginative approaches to community-based solutions for healthcare, trying to emphasize things like healthy living and preventative measures rather than the focus on hospitals and treatment. That tends to be the more seems like the more standard approach for the healthcare system. So I don't know that it will translate into a lot of seats for them. They are really hard pressed even to hold on to the two that they currently have, let alone expand their footprint. But it gives the party a much stronger reason to continue to be part of the conversation as a source of ideas, or perhaps as it's sometimes called the conscience of the legislature, there to say what would be the right answer as opposed to the politically expedient one.
Is there anything else you think it's important to bring to the conversation today?
I think it's important for voters to really take a look at, as I said, the policies, but also to look at the leaders themselves. This is in some ways the first time that either Mr. Rustad or Mr. Eby have been at the front of a party ticket, if you like, that they were the face of the party. Mr. Eby won the leadership of the NDP ultimately by acclamation, and has been governing. So British Columbians are pretty comfortable with him, and so you can sort of see from the track record of what he's done. But this is the first chance to see whether that kind of trust between politician and voters that his predecessor, Mr. Horgan, had in abundance, seemingly, if Mr. Eby is able to generate his own version of that. And for Mr. Rustad, in many ways, he is new to this role. He was until even a few months ago, the leader of a very small party. And so to take seriously what these leaders say they're going to do, and to try to understand the implications of their commitments around those big issues, but also issues around culture and education and so on, where we have seen Mr. Rustad take, for instance, a different position on the idea of gender inclusive education. So to really work through all these issues and what the implications of voting for one or the other is, that's an important part of this process as well, because the buck stops with the premier, and the government will in many ways reflect the preferences of that individual. So looking at policies, but also looking at the individual leader is important.
Stewart Prest, thank you very much for making the time.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Stewart Prest is a lecturer in political science at the University of British Columbia.
Midcoast Morning is made possible by the Community Radio Fund of Canada and generous listeners like you. Support and grow our nonprofit newsroom project today at chly.ca/donate with a monthly or one-time donation. With your support, we can expand Midcoast Morning from 2 to 3 original programs per week to cover local news, current affairs, and arts and culture.
With the election campaign underway, CHLY reporter Lauren MacKenzie spoke with Michael MacKenzie. He's the Jarislowsky Chair in Trust and Political Leadership at VIU. The position is one of 5 endowed Jarislowsky Chairs at Canadian universities. The long-term goal of this network, according to VIU's website, is to develop educational programming and training for future leaders. The programming will focus on trust and ethical practice in governance and political leadership.
What has stood out to you in the early days of this provincial campaign so far?
Well, I mean, before the formal campaign started, the big event, of course, was the BC United dropping out of the race. So this is, as far as I know, unprecedented. I can't think of another example. We have parties merging in other provinces and at the federal level. This is common in most democracies, but having a party drop out of the race right before an election starts is unprecedented.
And so right now, we currently have the three parties with candidates campaigning in the two Nanaimo area ridings, the Conservative Party of BC, the BC Green Party, and then the BC NDP. For each of these parties, what would you say is working for them, and what is sort of working against them for voters who are deciding to vote for them?
Okay, sure. I do think that obviously we've seen the Conservative Party come up in the polls quite dramatically. This is also a major event. I mean, it's what precipitated the folding of the BC United Party. So something's working for the Conservative Party. In my view, primarily, the Conservatives are banking on critiques of the NDP. And I think they are whipping up anger and discontentment against the existing government, which is a proven strategy in politics that often works. And so I think that that's really what they're doing. And certainly they have some policies that I think people are responding to, or at least they're saying that they will address problems that people agree are problems, things like the cost of housing, homelessness, and drug addiction. These sorts of issues are top of mind, inflation. And, if they can convincingly say that the government's not doing what they should, that they're angry about it, people seem to be responding to that. So I do think that that's why the support for the Conservative Party is going up. In terms of the BC NDP, I mean, I was looking at the recent and best of the polling available in British Columbia. It does look like the BC NDP are in a position to win the election. It'll be close. We don't know what will happen. We don't know if these polls are accurate. But I do think that there's a support base for the NDP that's staying fairly solid, even as we're seeing the rise of the Conservative Party.
And then going off of that, the Nanaimo area has been generally a large NDP stronghold for the last 50 years outside of a 4-year stint with a Liberal MLA. Has anything occurred that might result in sort of a shift in support from Nanaimo?
I mean, yes, it's been divided into 2 districts. So Nanaimo used to be one district, and now it will be Nanaimo Gabriola and Nanaimo Lancefield. So it's sort of been split in the middle, and there'll be one riding up in the northern part and the other in the rest of the city in Gabriola Island. So this makes a huge difference. The Nanaimo Gabriola riding looks like it'll stay NDP. Sheila Malcolmson is an experienced politician. She was a federal politician. She's been a cabinet minister. She's been an important part of the NDP government. She's well known. So it looks like she's likely to hold on to that riding. The Nanaimo Lancefield one is a little more up in the air. It is possible that the Conservatives will win there. The polling that I've seen recently suggests that the NDP is still ahead, but we have to be very, very cautious about polling in ridings because we don't have a huge number of people that have been surveyed in each riding. So, there's large margins of error. And the prediction is it's a toss-up. That means either the NDP or the Conservatives are going to win. So that's a big difference, right? We've had NDP in Nanaimo, as you said, for most of the recent past. And in this case, we might have an NDP representative in one part of the city and a Conservative in the other. Or they might both go NDP. That's a possibility too.
What do you think the outcome would look like for the next 4 years of politics if we had a NDP riding right beside a Conservative riding?
Yeah, well, I mean, this happens all over the province. Cities often are split politically depending on the area you're talking about. And so I don't think it would make a big difference to people in Nanaimo. I mean, you have opposition parties and the opposition is supposed to hold the government to account. But the representatives are supposed to represent everybody in the district, even if they didn't vote for them. And so for anybody living in Nanaimo, I don't think that that'll make a huge difference. And it's the government that makes decisions, so the city will be affected by the decisions the government makes in Victoria. And so I don't think it'll make a big difference, to the average person living in Nanaimo.
Why did the riding barriers shift?
Well, just because of the growing population in the city. So Nanaimo is one of the fastest growing cities in Canada. And political systems have to adjust to changing population dynamics all the time. And so we try in general to make sure that each riding has approximately the same number of people. That's important because, as democratic societies, we uphold the principle of one person, one vote. Really, that should mean one person, one equal vote. And if you have many, many people in one riding, your vote is proportionately worth less than if you have only a few people voting in each riding. So we tend to try and even out those numbers. Now, we don't get them right because there's other considerations in play. One of the considerations has to do with communities of interest. So you don't want to divide communities that see themselves as communities unnecessarily. So Nanaimo's been divided. That's typical in a city. You often have more than one riding in a city, but you also typically have more people in the urban dense areas than you would in the rural ridings. So basically, every so often we have to adjust the boundaries of our electoral districts to account for population changes, and that's all that's happened here. And in Canada, that's a nonpartisan process done by electoral commissions. So it's a lot less controversial than in the United States, where the boundaries are drawn by partisan commissions and they try and, benefit themselves. In Canada, typically the new boundaries are important because they affect our politics, as we've just discussed, but they're not controversial.
CHLY reporter Lauren MacKenzie discussing the provincial election campaign with Michael MacKenzie. He's the Jarislowsky Chair in Trust and Political Leadership at VIU. That's our story for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and Arby Frew is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter at chly.ca/subscribe for updates from our nonprofit newsroom and more. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. If you have a story you'd like us to cover, email us at news@chly.ca. Special thanks to Jesse Woodward and Lauren MacKenzie for extra production help on this show and over the last couple of weeks. I'm hoping to be back as normal starting next week. I'm also hoping you can join me then.